Hi there, this is Jim Knight, and I'm thrilled that we're talking today. I'm going to be talking today with Joellen Killion. Joellen and I go way back, but I'd like to talk about some of her accomplishments. She was Associate Director of Learning Forward for a long time and a huge influence on Learning Forward, which means she was a huge influence on professional development and professional learning in the world, especially the United States and Canada. She has a long list of books. I've written down some titles. Taking the Lead, one of the first books about coaching and education, Becoming a Learning School, Assessing Impact, The Feedback Process, Learning Educator, Coaching Matters. And these are only the books where she's either the first author or the only author of the book. There's many others she's written with, for example, Stephanie Hirsch, and she's critical in developing the professional development standards that Learning Forward develops, and on and on and on. When you talk about coaching and education, actually, when you talk about professional development and professional learning and education, you have to talk about Joellen. She's that influential. But that's not what I want to say, which is that she, and I'm really grateful for this, was a huge door opener for me when we started our own research on coaching. We did this video program years ago, probably around 2004, on instructional coaching. And it was Joellen, Steve Barkley, and me. And Joellen was the one who invited me. And I remember thinking, oh, gee, I'm like kind of legit. You know, I felt validated by the fact that she invited us. She gave me lots of opportunities to share ideas at Learning Forward. But what I really am grateful for is your role at the Teaching, Learning, Coaching Conference. As now, I think, our 15th year. And you had a million things to do, but you came, and I've often said you were like the spiritual heart of the whole conference. It was wonderful. And all that you put into helping us establish this conference, it's now attracts quite a few people. And that's why you were one of the first people, aside from Don Deschler and Gene Shoemaker, you were the first person to get the Don Deschler Leadership Award, where we acknowledge people whose work is so important, and we couldn't do what we did if it wasn't for them. So I'm impressed by your influence globally, but profoundly grateful for all you've done to help us move forward. So I'm thankful, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So welcome. I have this question I start off with. What's something people don't know about you? So I'm very keen to get the answer to that question. So what have you got for us, Joellen?
At the moment, Jim, I'm speechless. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for that heartfelt introduction. I could go on and on about how much I've grown and learned from our connection and relationship over the years. So I think in terms of what I would say, what people don't know about me is I'm incredibly proud of my family of educators. I have in-laws, my husband was a teacher, nieces who are teachers. I'm just so proud of what they are giving to students all over. I'm proud of that. I would say my love of chocolate is another thing people might not know about me, but it must be really good dark chocolate. I think people might know this about me. I'll just mention that there was some scientific evidence a while back about people who have a wanderlust gene. And I have that gene, and being quarantined and striving to be home-based is really difficult for somebody like me. So I'm pretty transparent. I don't think there's too much about me that people don't know, but those were just a few tidbits.
Well, thank you. I'm on the lookout now for good chocolate, but it's gonna be hard to get. It's probably online. Maybe I can find it online. So I'll look for it. Tell us how you got interested in coaching in the first place. Sort of, I know your story, but maybe if you could share a bit about your story, how you were a coach a few years ago and how that all evolved.
a few years ago is absolutely right. I happened to work with a team of educators in the school district I was working in at the time, Adams 12, just north of Denver. And we were very involved with the research of Madeline Hunter. That's how far back my work goes. And Madeline was one of those people who had done deep, deep research on core instructional theories and practices that made a significant difference. And our work helped us become skilled in those strategies, and then to apply those strategies and ultimately to support our colleagues in applying those strategies. And I was given the privilege of becoming a coordinator, a facilitator of that work in the high school I was working in. And I started coaching, even though we didn't call it coaching then, and it had a very different shape at that time. It was coaching. And so over the years, I've learned a lot about coaching. I sat at the feet of Art Costa and Bob Garmston and learned about cognitive coaching. I explored and studied life coaching, peer coaching, executive coaching, transformational coaching. And so I've just immersed myself in understanding a variety of different kinds of coaching, their purposes, and the approaches or skills or moves that people use. So that's how I got involved, and it's been a very long journey.
I think if I remember correctly, when you started out, people weren't all that keen to work with the coach. Do I have that recollection correct?
You might be referring to the story I've told many times about the principal who handed me a list of teachers who he had assigned me to fix these teachers. These are the teachers for you to work with. And I was a little bit horrified by that because I didn't see coaching as a fixing responsibility. Although I'm sad to say that still today in a lot of schools, there is that belief about coaching, that it's about fixing bad behavior, and that just troubles me. And it's always something I want to confront pretty immediately.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny how, and this was in Atul Gawande's article about coaching too, I think, but it's funny how someone who's there to make it easier for you to learn can sort of have a stigma attached to it. Whereas, why wouldn't we want to get better? I mean, we want to hide ourselves from the need to get better. But so that whole thing is kind of interesting how sometimes coaches aren't perceived as a positive, even though what they're really doing should actually increase your efficacy, help you be more effective, help you be a happier, more empowered human being.
It's kind of an interesting dichotomy. In the field of education, we are about learning and growing. That's what we do. That's what every educator does every day. Grows human beings. Teachers grow students. Principals grow teachers. Central office staff grow principals, et cetera, et cetera. Yet when it comes to the adults in a school system, we often, for some reason, change the paradigm. We change the rules. We lose track of the importance of learning and growth as the foundation of our work. And that dichotomy exists today. It's one that's so puzzling to me. Yet I think coaches can approach that challenge by beginning to build on success, to recognize success, to do what I call an asset approach to coaching versus a deficit approach to coaching, and help people recognize what's working well, how they know it's working, what's the evidence they're using, and then to begin to identify where those small steps of progress or growth, or what if there were something you really wanted to change, what would it be? So I think that stepping in using an asset approach might be one way tactically to address the situation that some people just might not yet be ready for coaching.
So I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to make it a two-part question following up on this. The first part of the question is, and we're not supposed to ask two questions at once, but I'm going to break the rules. So first question is, how do you define coaching? And the second question is, does it matter how we define coaching? Or you can flip it if you like.
You know, Jim, I've probably written 50 different definitions of coaching. I think every time I think about how to define that term, that construct, I find new words and new ways to define it. Today, I would define it as a process of personal and or professional growth that unpacks and discovers the inner teacher, the teacher we all hold inside of us, so that we can achieve our potential and affect those around us, affect ourselves, and affect the environment in which we work. I do think the definition matters. I think the definition matters more than we often think, because people's understanding of what coaching is and what it looks like varies. It varies depending on what I'm going to call school of coaching that you're involved in. If I am an expert coach whose current assignment is to help teachers implement a new curriculum, then my job is going to be the expert, to provide strong guidance and maybe even be directive. If my coaching is focused on helping you solve the challenges that you see, or to be invested in continuous improvement, then I probably am going to be using some different strategies and tactics. I may be more collaborative in my approach, or as you say, you use the term facilitative in my approach. So I think if we don't define it, what we get is a mismatch of expectations and practice. We sometimes have different standards that we're striving to achieve. So I think taking the time to define what we mean, set a clear purpose, outcomes for coaching, and a clear set of expectations for the work of coaches merits our attention. It's critical.
Yeah, I think the risk you run is if you're learning one model of coaching or one definition of coaching, and you're being asked to use use it in a different way, it's kind of like being trained as a dentist and being asked to do brain surgery, is my little analogy. So you just want to make sure that your preparation as a coach is preparing you to do the work you're going to be asked to do. I do think there's some risks in being limited by a definition. Oh, I can't do that. That's not coaching. You know, the ultimate goal is improved learning and well-being on the part of students. And so I think you don't want to pigeonhole yourself and say, well, I can't do that thing or go there. I think we always need to be open to trying new things and getting better. But I'm with you all the way. I think it's important how we define it, because we don't want to be doing brain surgery if we're trained as a dentist, you know?
Yeah, Jim, I don't think the definition is what limits us. I think it opens opportunities. That's how I think about it. I think it's the expectations that have the potential to be limiting. If my work is, and I'll use the example again around curriculum implementation, and I'm focused exclusively on that, if that's my expectation, then I may miss opportunities for personal development, adjusting attitude, confronting assumptions that get in the way, issues of equity in a classroom. So I think sometimes those expectations may be limiting. I don't know that the definition, and it may be, I'd have to really think more about that.
Well, let's move on to the next little question here. Just building on that. You've spent a lot of your professional life studying and writing about and learning about coaching. So you must think it's important. Why is it important to you?
Coaching is important because it is a part of the learning process. Learning is about acquiring knowledge, but that's not learning exclusively. If I acquire knowledge, I don't think that's sufficient. It's about examining and adapting my attitude and aspirations. It's about acquiring skills. And most importantly, it's about changing behavior. And for me, if I had to choose a single definition of learning, it would be changing the way a person thinks and learns. And that requires somebody to be a thinking partner, somebody to be a second set of eyes, somebody to provide insight, somebody to help me see what I can't see, somebody who is aware of where my blind spots are and illuminates those for me. So for me, that's what a coach can do. A coach can be embedding opportunities for me to be more critical, to learn processes like self-criticism or objective self-analysis. A coach can help me slow me down and guide me with wonderings or questions. And so learning, I think, can become easier. It can be sustained. It can be pushed into depths that are greater if we have the partnership of a coach with us. And I do believe people can learn to self-coach. That's something I'm exploring. And I think a way a person learns to self-coach is by having the partnership first of a very skillful coach.
So last week I talked to Michael Bungay-Stanier, and we talked about his questions, and I do this activity with his questions. You know, what's on your mind is the first question, and then what's the real challenge here, and then what do you really want, and what else? It's one of his big questions. And so we
question.
Right. So we do this activity that I stole from him with his permission, where people ask each other the questions and they can't say anything. And so if we were working together, you would ask me the question, I would give you the answer, and your role is just to listen, and you can communicate effectively non-verbally. And I've often wondered as I've watched that activity, you know, the coach is doing nothing. I mean, they're asking the question and they're quiet and they don't really say anything in the questions. And yet I don't think it would work the same way for me to go, Jim, what's on your mind and what's the real challenge here? Like I do believe in questions for reflective analysis of your day or what's happening. But I think there's something about, I don't even think an app could do it. I think there's something about the other person being there. So it'll be interesting to hear where you go with it. I would say you can, I mean, reflection in a way is coaching yourself. So there is something you can do, but I think there is great value in that other person. There's, even if they don't say a darn word, it's amazing how it is. It's interesting. It's a very interesting question. It'd be great if we could do it. And in better conversations, I talk about coaching yourself to become a better communicator. So
yeah.
But it's an interesting question. Well, this gets to the question, as we talk about coaching, how do you, and you talk about this in your new book, but how do you define the characters of a great coach?
I like to think about the characteristics of a great coach in 6 buckets. Let me see if I can remember all 6.
That's okay.
First, there is a set of dispositional areas that are really critical. What those fundamental beliefs are. For example, a belief in the capacity of every human being to learn and grow. teaching expertise, content expertise, or curriculum expertise. I can coach a Spanish teacher, even though I might not be able to speak Spanish. There's relational expertise, and embedded in relational expertise is communication. Obviously, coaching expertise and leadership expertise. And I like to think about all of those areas that are important to grow coaches in. They're not all equal, of course. However, if I were hiring a coach, I would hire not for what a candidate knows or is able to do. I'd hire for disposition, because I can teach those other areas. I can grow those other areas more quickly, certainly, than I can grow that dispositional piece. That's the hardest one. Masterful teachers who become coaches really come up against that on almost a daily basis in the work they do as a coach. And so I'd rather have them start with a set of dispositions that will support them in being the best coach they can be, and then slowly adjust those over time if needed.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's certainly what we found in hiring coaches in our project that we did with Topeka School District. That plus, if you have a community of coaches, they can teach each other pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But if the disposition, if they're not, in our language, we would say, if they're not lined up with the partnership approach, it's going to be hard for them to flourish. So I think that's interesting. How do you think now coaches, what can they do for themselves during this time to strengthen their practice, to become better coaches?
This is a time where I would encourage every coach to deeply examine what he or she is learning. I think it was Plato who said the unexamined life is not worth living. That's what I want coaches to do. I want them to be aware of what they are confronting, to be aware of what's happening inside of them, the challenges they're facing with teachers, how they respond, how teachers respond. I want them to read those experiences every day and make sense of them. And the way to make sense of them is to identify the lessons learned. So if I'm a coach and I'm helping a teacher today plan for the next unit that she's going to be posting online for her students to do, and we've talked about the assessment strategies, and we've got the learning area targets or focus planned, and what the resources our students will use, and she's developing her little intro video or instructional video. We're working together to do that. And in that experience, what am I aware the teacher is learning? What am I aware of in terms of the teacher's questions of me? What am I discovering that I know and I don't know? Which of the tasks that we're facing are harder for me than they are for the teacher? And what sense do I make of that? What am I learning? And I use that information to review where I am in my coaching practice. I can help identify the areas of growth I need as a coach. I can celebrate the successes I have as a coach, and I can use those lessons learned in a shared situation with other coaches so that we can become teachers of one another. Just as you were saying, coaches can teach each other. That's what I think coaches can do for themselves during this time. Not to mention self-care and making sure they're in nature and making sure they have quality time with their families, but about their work as a coach. What are they learning?
I think I was thinking about this today. This is such a complex, challenging time, which means it is a great opportunity for learning. But this was just today's thought. But the people we work with, if we're coaches or in whatever role we do, are going through crap. I mean, and they're going through, for lack of better terms, inarticulate crap. I mean, they're stressed and they're not even conscious of the fact they're stressed.
Yeah, could be.
I noticed that I'm always clenching my teeth, and I'm like, man, I didn't even, I must be stressed, but I don't really. So people have got this stress and they've got these challenging emotions they don't even really know they have. And so as a coach, you have to be compassionate for that, but you've got the same problem. You're working through stuff you don't even realize you're going through. So it's a great learning opportunity, but it's an interesting challenge. And so I would say part of self-care, I'm sure you agree with me on this one, is you have to cut yourself. You have to be forgiving of yourself, because these are crazy times, So
identify it, acknowledge it, chalk it up.
Right.
It's what happened today. I did not know how to use that aspect of Google Classroom. And we laughed, and the teacher was upset, and I was upset. I couldn't do it. And now we're going to go get help. But
right.
Wow, we didn't do what we intended to do. But I'm not going to sweat about it all night long.
Right.
Grace and forgiveness. Grace and forgiveness.
Yeah, it's easy to say, isn't it? It's tougher in the moment, but
sometimes we have to say it out loud a lot of times.
So. So in taking the lead, talking about coaching, and I don't know if you can rattle off these 10 roles, it'll be a little test for you, but you talk about the different roles of coaches. I think that's one of your real great contributions to the field is I see people all the time thinking about what they do using those rules. Would you mind giving us sort of a really quick recap of those 10 roles?
I can do that. I could talk for hours about those roles, but here they are. So let me just preface this just a tiny bit, that knowing the roles helps coaches define the work they do, helps them communicate what they can do to support their colleagues, and helps them prioritize what's most important. And I think we're often missing that ability. So the roles help in that way. One is a resource provider, and it is just amazing how many coaches are spending time right now finding stuff for teachers to use. So resource provider is one of those roles, and it involves not only finding the stuff, but helping teachers learn how to find and critique the stuff. What's good, what's not good. Data coach is a giant role many coaches have. It's the role of helping teachers know what constitutes data, how to read data, how to use data, how to generate data for students in terms of assessment and their practice, how to measure their own effectiveness as a coach and the effectiveness of teachers. So data coach is a big role. An instructional specialist, this is knowing everything we need to know about learning design, how to engage students, how to assess student learning, what are the multiple methods. I always go back to Bruce Joyce's models of teaching, the 64 different ways of designing instruction for students. That's what an instructional specialist does, including differentiation, adapting for equity, monitoring for all of the different needs of students in a classroom. The curriculum specialist is someone who kind of toes the line and helps teachers know what the curriculum is, what its expectations are, and how to use it well. Classroom supporter is often the only role most people who talk about coaching think about. And we say classroom supporter is the work that's done in the classroom with the teacher and students present. And it involves demonstration or model teaching, co-teaching, and observing in order to prepare for reflection conversations. So that's classroom supporter. Mentoring is a role. We have lots of coaches who work only with novice teachers. And so that requires a little bit of different knowledge and skills and expertise. Learning facilitator is another role, and that's the role of being engaged in designing and facilitating learning in a side-by-side, small group or large group setting. School leader, this is one of those often invisible roles. Coaches are people that others look to, and they always are curious about what the coach is going to say or do about this new pronouncement or this change. And so coaches are always school leaders. They are very influential, and they lead with their attitude. They lead with their actions, and they lead with their words. Catalyst for change, another really critical role coaches have. It is about challenging the status quo, challenging the assumptions that serve as barriers to progress, challenging those things that get in the way of progress. And the last one, which was one we almost forgot, and that is the role of learner. A coach is a learner. So what we say in our work with coaches and districts is, where are the priority roles? Choose the 3 to 5 that are the top priorities, where coaches, the majority of coaches' time is invested to guide coaches to make good decisions about how they spend their time every day. And when they know those roles, they know what the priorities are, and they kind of know that 50% of my time approximately is spent in the classroom supporter role, and only 10% of my time is spent in as a resource provider. Coaches just have a much easier time structuring their day and know what to say yes to, and most importantly, what to say no to.
So a coach doesn't have to do all 10 roles then?
Oh, please, no. And this, Jim, is what led to what I wrote for you in, I think, 2009, Coaching Heavy and Coaching Light.
Mm-hmm.
I was aware that as I was teaching people about the roles, people just, and maybe I said it to them, I don't know, they assumed they had to do all. And what all led to was what I call flitting from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. And that really came home to me one day when I watched a coach. I had the privilege of following her for a day. She did 7 demonstration lessons, literally ran through the school building, pushing a cart. On that cart, she had all the materials for these 7 different lessons. She flew into a classroom, unloaded her lesson, got her cart, ran to the next room. I was exhausted at the end of the 3rd lesson, and she kept going. And it dawned on me at the end of that day that I don't care how many demonstration lessons she was doing in a day, not much was going to change, because what was missing were the critical conversations about the demonstration lessons, the engagement with the teacher and what was planned, how it was planned, what decisions she made. And none of that happened. She was a showcase, a showman. She was like an act in a circus.
Right. That's interesting. Well, good. I'm glad we don't have to do all 10 roles. I'm happy to hear that. But I do think that it gets back to your issue of definition. Having the 10 roles and using it as a way to think through what you're doing, and then also assessing. I know you do a good job of explaining how coaches use their time, and also that distinction between coaching heavy and coaching light is a really, really important one. Just when people hear the words, I talk about surface and deep coaching, but I really built on your heavy and light, when they hear those words, they go, I need to do more heavy coaching. I'm doing too much. And once they've got the words, they can do something. Another one of your books that's important is assessing impact, evaluating professional learning. So I have two questions, and I'm going to break them up. The first one is, do you think that professional learning and professional development are synonyms? Do they mean the same thing? And if not, what's the difference?
Yeah, no, they are not the same thing, because I can do all kinds of professional development as a facilitator of learning. I can design it. I hate this word associated with anything to do with professional learning, yet it is a perfect word for professional development. I can deliver it. I can deliver professional learning. I can train people. I can organize jigsaw activities. That's all the development work. What matters is the learning. And I think for so long in our field, we focused on the development issue and not on the learning issue. Again, this is one of those kind of dichotomous situations. If we ever did that in a classroom with a group of students where we didn't care about their learning and started with that, yet when it comes to adults, we work on the development stuff. We figure out what's the best food to have this afternoon to keep people alert. How comfortable are those chairs for this? And is this a time for a small group activity? Or should we do this in a large group? Without really deeply even understanding what it is we want people to change as a result of that experience. So in assessing impact, I make the point that we want our outcomes to be defined around those CASABs, those areas I mentioned before. What's changing in knowledge, what's changing in attitude, what's changing in skill, aspiration, and behavior. And that's what I'm looking at, and that's what professional learning intends to do.
So, and maybe you've answered this question with the CASAM, but what are some tips you've got for how to evaluate whether or not coaching is effective?
Again, another long story, Jim, that we could focus on. You know, a couple things.
I have the whole book right here.
You have the whole book, and you have an old edition. So
this is the second edition.
Yep, there's a third.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, I know the third. I like this cover, but you know.
I do like that cover too, but the third one's good as well.
Right.
So here's.
I have the first two somewhere.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my
I
goodness.
think so.
Here are a couple tips. First, know whether we're evaluating coaching or the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't distinguish between those two things, then we're probably not going to get very far. So evaluating the coach is a personnel task. Evaluating coaching is looking at that act. And I would say we can look at the effectiveness of it. Is it changing, first of all, what I call effectiveness level 1 teaching behavior? And is it affecting student learning? So that's effectiveness 2. It's tiered. 1 is we bypass,
Mm-hmm.
we move from the coach through the teacher to the student. And so if we really want to know if coaching is working, we're not going to ask the question, do you like coaching? What we're going to ask is, how are you changing your practice as a teacher? And what's the evidence that students are learning more efficiently, effectively, more deeply, in different ways, whatever would be appropriate for the context? And those are the two questions we have to ask, and they are not easy to answer in a large scale environment, but we can answer them, and there are ways to do it.
Well, I think your distinction is a really great one. Are we analyzing coaching? Are we analyzing or assessing coaching? Are we assessing the coach? I think that's a hugely important starting point. And I honestly hadn't thought about it that much. So I think I'm grateful for that gift, you know.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So in Coaching Matters, the new edition, when's it coming out, the new version?
It should be ready mid-June-ish, I think.
So I had the pleasure of seeing an earlier version of it, and you kind of lay out a number of different things, but it seems to me if you wanted to make sure you have a great coaching program, that's the book to read. And I'm sure there are other ones too. I love Michael Fullan and the book he wrote about professional learning communities with Rick DeFore. I forgot Rick's name for a second. The book's about professional learning communities, but I think it's about any kind of support. So I think it's a great one, but yours is extremely helpful. And so I know this is a question that we really need 2 days for, but could you give us a few suggestions about what people should do if they want to set up a great coaching program, recognizing the first thing they should do is get your book? What are some other things you think they should do?
So in that book, my co-authors and I identify what we call a framework for an effective coaching program. And that framework delineates a series of questions or factors to do to either establish or upgrade. We have some coaching programs that have been in practice for 10 or 12 years and need some tuning up. And so the first thing we do is to say, is there written and published a clear purpose for coaching, a way of setting goals for the coaching program? What is it that we're striving to accomplish? Those are simple first steps, and they take time and they take input from a wide variety of voices in the process. And then we define what we hold as expectations for coaches, what their work looks like. We help shape that work in terms of setting some parameters. It helps, that book defines what principals' roles are. It defines what teachers' roles are. It talks about how to establish and assess the conditions for coaching. So there was a time when I was working with a district and they wanted to put coaches in every low-performing school. And we did a little walkthrough and interview with the principals in those schools. And there was one school I just didn't feel comfortable putting a coach in. And I said that to my district colleague, and she asked why, and I told her it was the principal's readiness. The principal was not ready to share responsibility for instructional leadership. And I didn't think it was fair to put a coach in that situation. So the conditions and culture in a school matter so much. We can have the best coach possible walk into a school that's not yet ready for coaching and have a disaster. The coach can't alone overcome those cultural or conditional challenges. So the book addresses that. How do we help teachers be ready for coaching? So that's what the book focuses on, and it kind of is a stepwise process. Make sure you've got this. Do you have that? When you have this, and please don't write the job description for the coach until you've done the first 5 things, and don't hire them until you've done that.
It's a huge contribution. I mean, the other book was great, but this has really gone to another level in terms of helping people create great coaching programs. I was really, really impressed.
Thank you.
I want to get to some questions that we had on our Facebook page, but I have one last question for you that I can't resist asking. So this question is, I once heard you and me described as the godmother and the godfather of instructional coaching. So I think the godmother was you and I was the godfather. And I was complimented to be included with you in such a way. And I recognize I'm one of many, many people. in coaching. But part of me was thinking, first off, couldn't we be the father and the mother rather than the godfather and godmother? Godfather seems pretty old, but so all to say, what I wanted to ask you is this: we've been doing this work for a while. So my question is, as you look back on what you've accomplished, what stands out as something you're really proud of?
Well, Jim, I'm so grateful we haven't been called the grandmother and
I actually
father.
thought it was grandfather and grandmother, and I was
You
like,
know,
what? But it wasn't. It was godfather.
When I hear godmother, that just really excites me, because a godmother is someone who's committed to holding integrity and faithfulness, and I also picture myself as that godmother in the Cinderella story that has a wand that can make things happen. And here's the one thing I would make happen in coaching if I could wave my wand, and that is that I would make sure every coach was coaching in conditions inside the culture of coaching that allowed that coach to be as successful as possible. I'd wave my wand. But anyway, in terms of contributions, I appreciate you acknowledging the roles being a contribution. I think it helps coaches and their supervisor unpack what coaching means and what it can be, and how to adapt coaching for different situations and to work with different needs of teachers. So I think that's important. I think the coaching heavy and coaching light, even though I know people are challenged by those words, I didn't choose them lightly. I chose them with deep intent. I wanted that heaviness to be equivalent with significance and profound. And so I chose that word. People always want to change it, and you've changed it. Deep works for sure, but that for me is certainly something that I feel really good about in terms of a contribution. And I think the more I can raise the voice for coaches, having the conditions, helping coaches know how to contribute to establishing those conditions for sure, but also helping coaches realize that when they're in those conditions, they know how to challenge them and speak up for themselves. So I'm proud of the work I've done with principals in helping them understand their contribution to the success of any coaching program.
Well, I do agree that the roles are an important contribution, really important contribution. And I would add to that that the new book talking about systems of support, creating a program, maybe program isn't the right word, but providing a setting where coaches can flourish. You've spelled that out pretty clearly too. So I think that a few years from now, if we talk about that, we'll look back on that book as a huge contribution too. So
Thank you.
it continues to be wonderful to learn from you. Here are a few questions, and they're not, people are really got a lot on their mind. So I'll just share a few of them. How might an upcoming recession or even depression affect where coaching goes next? How can coaches adapt in a world where they might be viewed as a financial luxury?
Yeah, wow. I'm worried about that personally. Coaches have always been viewed as a luxury. The first and foremost thing that we need to do is to make sure we have a solid way of assessing and evaluating the impact of coaching with data and evidence. It's pretty hard to argue that coaching isn't critical. When we don't have the evidence, then it's easy to dismiss coaches. I've seen it happen again and again in districts as they have faced some financial challenges. So I'd say let's get after some of that evidence. The other thing I think that's really important is for coaches to remember that almost all of the work they were doing face-to-face, virtually all of it, is easily transferable to the virtual environment, and then more. So I think we want to make sure we know how that's happening and be able to articulate it clearly.
I recognize the financial difficulties of this time and the sort of scary future, but if ever there was a time we needed coaches, it's now, because there is
Yes.
so much learning going on. So I'm struck by
Yes.
and also blown away by what coaches are accomplishing. We have this thing we're doing Thursday nights with about 70 people who volunteered to create an instructional playbook for remote learning. And they're just all getting together and putting together amazing stuff just because they care.
That's
And
right.
like in a heartbeat, all of these people came together and made it happen. It's amazing, you know?
It is amazing. And coaches have been so inventive.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. The way they have just so quickly learned to adapt, most of them. And some of them are running as fast as they can, but they're doing great stuff to support teachers and students.
Well, this is why your new book's so important. I not to keep harping on it, but because if you create the right conditions, I've always felt teachers will blow you away, educators will blow you away. And this is a time where if you basically everybody has had to redefine themselves completely in what they do in a matter of a week or two. And, March 13th, Friday the 13th, we were all in the classroom, and a week later it's completely different. And everybody's like, okay, well, we have a different world. We're going to adapt and deal with it, So if you create the conditions for success, educators will really do amazing things. I think that's what this time is showing, what their potential is.
Yeah.
Second question I've got here is, what are the biggest shifts coaches need to consider when distance coaching? What skills need to be emphasized the most and why?
In some respects, there are not many shifts coaches need to make. They're doing the same kind of work. I think the one that requires more attention is relationship. I notice that when I'm engaged with people now, I'm spending more time attending to that relationship in more overt ways than I would if I were there in person. In person, I can express that with a pat on the back or those hugs that might occur, or even a handshake. And obviously, I can't do that long distance, even though I'd love to. And very often, I think about, will we be able to do those things going back to school? But anyway, I think the attention to the relationship is one area I would encourage coaches not to ignore. And that may mean that more time goes to that than to the more technical aspects, at least to make sure that teachers are in a good place, that we're attentive to their social and emotional status, that we're helping them in those areas. So that would be the big one that I would attend to.
One of the cool things about Zoom, although there's a lot of Zoom fatigue going on, but the fact that you can record the conversation and go back and look at it, you can say, now, what was I doing? I've got little things I notice all the time, like my email keeps popping up on the side of my screen, which means I look away. So I have to figure out how to turn off my email. But video is such a huge tool for helping you get better at the way you listen and that. So I think there are some good things to this Zoom world we're living in. What's your best advice for remote learning or otherwise for working within a coaching program when the vision for instructional coaching doesn't align with your own vision?
See, that's one of those situations where, there's tension. I'm going to sound like I know the answer to this, and I'm not sure I do know the answer. So I'm just going to approach it from a consultative stance, describing what I might do. The first thing I might do is to figure out, what is the difference? What is the root of that difference? And how that difference is being manifested. Is it being one side being spoken by one person and another, but I try to figure it out. And then I try to figure out how much of me could invest in a middle ground. What are some things that I could do that might be middle ground? Maybe not all on my side or in my camp or all in the other camp, but how can I stretch myself to step into some middle ground space? So it may be negotiating a bit. It may be I'll buy that for a little while, but after 2 weeks, I'm going to begin to step out. It would be understanding whether or not there's really a threat to my integrity. If there is a threat to my integrity, then I have a choice, and I have a really difficult choice. And I think this is not true just in a virtual arena. It's also true in face-to-face. If I'm being asked as a coach to do something I don't believe in, or that is not aligned with the expectations of my role, then I am going to want to have one of those, what I call an opportunity conversation with whoever is the right person to sit down and really dialogue through that.
I think that idea of testing your assumptions up front, making sure that you have a clear picture of what's happening, is a really important thing, because you might find there's more in common than you realize if you really check on that. And then to me, the ultimate decision maker always is what's best for kids. So what can I do in this situation that's best for kids, as I have to try to decide how to do what I do. But I love what you said about it. Maybe it's consultative, but I think it's a great response. One more question that I just want to ask about the Teaching Learning Coaching Conference. If schools don't reopen and we begin the new school year virtually, how can I ensure I am coaching to the best of my ability and supporting teachers from a distance?
So I think the first thing that's critical to do is to make sure that as a coach, I would do many of the beginning of the school year things I do in person. Get clear on my role, get clear on my expectations, establish a clear partnership agreement with the principal and with each teacher, and be able to explain to teachers crisply, clearly. And I've even seen some coaches do this in a diagram form. These are the ways I can support you. So being able to communicate that crisply, clearly, is the first thing I would encourage.
I think that's great. That's great advice. So TLC this year, theoretically, is in San Antonio. And our plan is to have the conference either virtual, well, it's going to be virtual and live, or perhaps just virtual. And people are able to register risk-free. They don't have to pay or anything. And but if we do switch to virtual and they still want to come online and watch the conference, they can do it. So the trouble with virtual is we won't be able to go out for dinner in San Antonio, which I'm really looking forward to. And we've got a mariachi band. I mean, we have a lot of cool things, but I love San Antonio. So my question is, first off, do you know how many TLCs you've come to? It's got to be more than 10, right?
I counted the other day, and I think it was, I think I've missed 2, Jim.
Right. So we've had 12 or 13. This will be the 12th or the 13th. I'm not 100% sure.
12th as far as my notes in my calendar go, but that's not to say. And I think I know I've missed 1 for sure, and maybe 2.
Wow. So as we look ahead to TLC, we see you as a presenter, and we're doing panel discussions where we bring together several people to discuss things. In case you can't see everybody, you can see them in the panels. Is kind of our plan. What are you planning to talk about at TLC?
So this year I am hoping to talk a little bit about coaches' mental models, their mindsets, and how, again, this goes back to this understanding that the assumptions we hold drive the way we think, act, and speak. Very often we don't know the assumptions that we hold. They're kind of hidden to us. We espouse one thing and do something that may be in contradiction. So helping coaches through a process to discover those assumptions that may be driving their actions. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and to really be thinking about whether we operate more from a head stance, a heart stance, or a hand stance, which is the way I describe the sort of three predominant mental models coaches have.
Thank you so much, Joellen. It's been a pleasure as usual. I'm always grateful for every conversation we have, and I look forward to the next one. Next week, the person I'm going to be talking to is Natasha Sistrunk-Robinson, who's my coach right now. And she's going to be talking about coaching leaders around equity, her experiences, her story, which is amazing. And many people may not have heard of her, but you will hear of her. She's a powerful force for good. So I'm excited to hear Natasha's story next week. And she was just coaching me today, actually, and I have more energy, more clarity, and I'm ready to act. So that's
fabulous. That's fabulous, Jim. That's great. These conversations have been wonderful, and I'm just so honored to be a part of this. And I have a request of you. So when we're together next time, and we can have one of those conversations that you and I have as often as we can, where we kind of look at the sort of distinctions between our different beliefs, I want to unpack with you the definition of dialogue. So hold that as something you and I are going to do.
Wow. Well, I do think it's thinking together. I think it's almost like there are levels of the definition.
Yeah.
As you were talking today, I was thinking about, we better finish here because we're at our point, but I was struck by how influential, I'm guessing, Peter Senge has been for you, and he has been for me. Many of the things you're talking about, I'm like, it all comes back to when I read The Fifth Discipline, dialogue and mental models and learning organizations. I mean, it's amazing.
It goes back a little further for me. It's the work of Donald Schoen.
Right.
And the work of David Hunt, who was at OISE for many years, who's done some work on personal theory building. And his work and Schoen's work have been enormously influential in my own work, and there are many others. And then, of course, Senge. These are all folks who wrote and existed years before Senge did. So there's a whole slew of those cognitive psychs who influenced my work. So,
you built on Schoen's definition. You expanded what he had to say about reflection and talked about reflection 4. Is that the terminology?
Yes,
I think that was a really significant contribution.
Yeah, thank you.
But we better shut her down.
We better say goodbye.
All right. Well, take care, and we'll see you in San Antonio, I hope.
I hope so. I look forward to it.